That's all the chairs we need, yeah. Pass that around. All right. We are so grateful to have this wonderful panel with us today. By way of introduction, I found out this morning that Richard Hayes passed away this week. And some here know that Dr. Hayes co-wrote a book that came out just a few months ago, arguing for full queer inclusion, but also sharing his deep regret for earlier writings that harmed this community. And so I just want to bring that up as an example of epiphany. An epiphany is about widening our awareness of God's love and compassion. Epiphany, as we heard before, is the story of God showing up in surprising places. And so we are surprised by the Magi, these sort of foreign astrologers, this story of God drawing near to the Magi and hiding the message of their countercultural love right in the place they were looking, in the stars. At the center of Epiphany, as we've heard, is God's insistence that everyone is invited into the divine story. No one is foreign to the grace of God. God is always opening the door of grace wider, inviting us in so that all are welcome at the table. On Epiphany, we celebrate this ongoing, expanding revelation of God. The story of the Magi reminds us that this revelation often comes to and through those who are othered, those who the church has marginalized. So PMC has a tradition on Epiphany Sunday of highlighting the voices of our LGBTQ plus siblings here at PMC. So let us listen well and join me in welcoming Jax and HK and Lila.
Cool. My name is HK. My pronouns are they, she.
I'm Jax. My pronouns are he, him.
I'm Lila. My pronouns are she, her.
All right. Well, they have a number of stories that they have brought for us today. And so my first question is, when the Magi encountered the Christ child, they were filled with joy. Can you share an encounter with God or Jesus or the Spirit that filled you with joy? I especially invite you to reflect on a time when you felt seen and embraced in all the layers of your identity.
Sure. Many of you know that I love kids. I love babies. I love animals. And I feel like those kind of all go in the same category for some reason. But yeah, so I was in 8th grade when I came out as transgender, and I was not worried about not being loved because I knew that I would be loved. I was worried about being accepted, and I feel like those are really different things. And so I was nervous coming to church, not because I thought I would, be treated differently or anything like that, but there's always something in the back of your mind. And I remember standing up during prayer and sharing, yeah, okay, great. Sorry, Melba. And it was awesome because I shared that, I'd come out as transgender and I was switching my pronouns and I was changing my name kind of to identify with myself a little more. And it was amazing because I so vividly remember everybody standing up and clapping. And I felt so celebrated and valued by this community because it wasn't something that I was like, it wasn't just like, oh, great, you came out as trans. Like, good job. Like, who cares? It was like, wow, like, that's really amazing. Like, good job. And so I felt really embraced. And I was also worried about the kids because, kids are so unpredictable. You never know how it's going to go. It could very easily go either way. Um, and I love how much the kids in this community have just totally switched their view of me. Not like as me as a person, they still see me as like, oh, that's Jax. But it's like they're just like automatically like, yeah, he's a boy. So what? He's the same person. And that has been so empowering to be like, even people who aren't necessarily exposed to it or haven't seen it before doesn't mean that they can't learn or, learn to embrace it and love it. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I also have an experience I had of like specifically the younger generation and the joy and wonder I am finding in how they are perceiving and understanding and engaging differently with inclusion and gender and all that and sexuality and all that kind of stuff. I have a cousin that a couple years ago I was. It's actually my first cousin's like daughter, and she's like 12 or something at the time. And we were, hanging out at my grandparents' place and whatever, and we're just talking about whatever TV shows, I think. And she out of nowhere just is like, hey, are you neurotypical? Because I'm not. And it was just so like, it's just like she might as well have been asking me like, where did you grow up? It was just like she just wanted to get to know me, and that was a perfectly normal, acceptable question to ask as part of getting to know me. And why would she assume that I was neurotypical? And why would she assume that there was anything wrong with her not being neurotypical? And I know that queerness and being neurotypical are not the same thing, but there's a lot of overlap, in the experience of being different in some way. And a lot of queer people are not neurotypical. I have my fidget toy up here with me. And I love that I can do that here. And everyone's just like, cool, sounds good. Can I play with it? Right? Yeah. And it just brought me, I have thought so many times about that, where it's like, it gave me such gratitude and joy for the courage that queer people and other non-neurotypical, people have had and over recent decades, to bring us to the point that this young person can ask that question without any reservations, and it's great and it's fine. And that we could then connect over like, no, I'm not actually, and neither is she. And like, are you straight? No, I'm not, neither is she. It's just like, it's all like, it's on the table, and it's something that we can celebrate and enjoy and know about each other and not have to hide and not have to mask. And it just gave me such gratitude, hope for the future and where we're headed, and also like gratitude for where we've come from, how far we've come, and the sacrifice and the acceptance, not only of queer people, but like, like straight people have like had to participate to get to the point that we could, so I'm also grateful for that like, that they're learning how to make space for us, and I'm grateful for it.
I attended, I think a year ago, a BIPOC dialogue, specifically for side A and side B queer questions and allies. And it was one of the first spaces I think I've ever entered where I did not have to sacrifice my race for my gender or sexuality. So often, my experience in white Christian America has been, if I want to be in a progressive space, it's predominantly white. And if I want to be in an Asian space, it's predominantly conservative. And so just in my own personal relationship with self, with faith, with God, it's always been one or the other. And it was such a gift to be in a space that was like, no, this is for queer people of color. And that's it. It's your space to be empowered, to exist, to share, to connect, to struggle. with your differences of belief. And more recently, I have found queer BIPOC spaces here in LA, which took a long time, living here for 5 years to find. And it's just been another way of coming home to myself. It's been really beautiful.
Sometimes it's easy to listen to the voice of Herod instead of the voice of God in our lives, or even to confuse Herod's voice with God's. Herod could represent the empire, the powers that be, human authorities, the voice of fear. At first, the Magi seemed to listen to Herod, yet a dream warned them to go in a different direction. Can you share what the voice of Herod has sounded like in your life, especially in relation to your gender identity or sexuality? What are the untruthful messages or stories you've been told? And what does God's voice sound like in contrast? Yeah, it's a deep one.
I have always had a very strong relationship with the divine. God has always been close to me since I was a child. Throughout my life, there's been this like parallel journey of my relationship with God that has been so independent of theology, of church, of social structure, and I'm so grateful that they pursued me in that way and gave me, yeah, just that relationship that I could hold on to through a lot of ups and downs. And so in college, I read several books on how to be straight for God. I was really trying, y'all. Like that relationship is real and I wanted to honor it. And this framework and this structure was like, well, here's how you can do it. Be really straight for God. And I was like, all right, I'm in. Let's do it. I read a bunch of books that I frankly will not name here because I think they've done enough harm. But if you want to ask, I'll tell you after. Um, and their tone was always about the worthiness of God and how they needed us, I use they, them pronouns for God, to die to ourselves, to kill our own humanity, to suppress and demonize our own desire, our own humanity. That can look like a lot of things. That doesn't have to just look like not being straight or not being cisgendered. And at the same time that I was reading all these books, I still had these profound encounters. And I remember a distinct one with God was I was just being honest. I was like, this is really hard, dude. I don't think I can do this. And I remember they were just like, I don't want you to be straight. I just want you to be with me. That's really what I'm interested in. And at the time, I didn't know how to interpret any of that, but it's been a through line through my own journey of coming out because that's what they've wanted the whole time. It's been very sweet.
For me, growing up in Christian spaces, um, there was this idea that morality and virtue is somehow external to ourselves, and it's like church, for me at least in my experience, made a virtue of conformity and made a virtue of trying to conform to what's expected of you in church circles and what, you know, a certain biblical interpretation of a godly Christian looks like, and some, you know, higher ideal of how you're supposed to be. And when I got to seminary, I learned the concept of the total depravity of man, and I was like, that's what I was running up against all those years, was this underlying idea that somehow like who you are isn't good, who you are is corrupted somehow, or is not trustworthy somehow, or is unacceptable to God and unacceptable to, you know, the way that we're called to be. And that was like something that you were always supposed to be trying to strive to overcome and to fix and to conform to this other thing. And in my experience, that created a deep distrust towards my own self and an sense of alienation from my own being. I could not trust how I was. I could not trust who I was. I couldn't trust how God made me, because somehow that was just like irreparably corrupted, original sin, that whole idea. And for me, what that it's so non-relational. It's so deeply not relational. And like I had to learn how to love and trust my own body and my own identity and my own, volition and desires and moral reasoning and whatever it might be, because like there wasn't space for me to be a queer Christian where I grew up. That just wasn't a thing. That wasn't in the pattern I was handed. And so I spent years trying to get rid of that part of myself, or ignore it, or deny it, or whatever. And it got tied to something much, much broader about more generally just not trusting myself and not trusting God living in me and speaking through me. So the voice of Herod, so to speak, was very much like this voice saying, you're not acceptable and you need to be different and you need to strive always towards that. Whereas now I'm recognizing that God is like there's this theory. Sorry, I'm going on. I'll try to wrap it up. But like their attachment theory talks about like a good parent creates a safe like home base that you can always retreat to and feel comfortable and secure, and it's okay. And then from there, you are empowered and given the confidence and courage to venture out, take risks, explore, push past what feels comfortable and safe. And when it gets to be too much, you can retreat back again and be like, okay, we survived that. We're okay. We know more about the world now. We know more about ourselves now. You recharge and you go out. And to me, that's what God sounds like, and that's what healthy Christian community sounds like, is that it's okay to question, and it's okay to push, and it's okay to make mistakes and to be who you are and whatever. And then you have a secure place to come to and retreat to and feel comforted and healed.
I grew up in PMC. This is like, I haven't ever been to any other church. And at school, when I came out as trans, people were like, but wait, you go to church. So how are you trans? And then when people knew me for the first time as being trans but not a Christian, they're like, wait, but you're trans. How can you be a Christian? And for a lot of people, those two things just don't go together. Like they're not even in the same sentence, let alone the same book. And so it was hard for me to feel like when I was in, heavily Christian spaces, to feel like I could hold the part of being trans and also being Christian. And then when I'm in heavily queer spaces, to be holding the space of being queer and then also being Christian, because there is so much trauma in the queer community from Christianity. And so for me to have a different experience growing up in PMC with Christianity, it's just not even seen as possible that as a trans person, I could have a good relationship with God and have a good relationship with my church and the people in my church and like the pastor of my church. Like, that's just like crazy. Like, oh my gosh, wow. And so like it was hard, like when people would know me as trans and they wouldn't know me as, Christian, and then I would come to church and I would have like a Jesus loves you t-shirt on my thing, and people would like tell double glance like, what, like that doesn't fit. And it's been really interesting for me to find how, like, I feel like in the Bible it's like God is love, and I'm bisexual, by showing my love, that is God. So how can love ever be seen as like not God? So why should love like ever just like, oh, that's not godly? And I feel like that's really stupid. That like people are like, oh, if you love a different gender, then that's not godly. But if you love this gender, then that's like, oh. Anyway, I could go on a tangent, but I'm not going to. But just figuring out how I can hold both my spirituality and my gender and sexuality and have them be in the same book, in the same sentence, and holding a space for both of those things and kind of melding them and not having them be different things, but really bringing them together and making them one.
Well, picking up on a theme that several of you mentioned, a theme of home. Verse 12 of our Matthew passage says, the Magi went home by another way, by a different road. Can you share a story or experience in your life when you were expected to go one way or play a part or live out an identity that wasn't your own? And how did you find your way home to yourself, to community, to home?
Strangely, this isn't directly related to queerness, but strangely, in the church environment that I was in when I started my seminary journey in order to become a chaplain, because that was always my goal when I went into seminary, was I knew I was called to be a chaplain. And strangely, the other way in those circles was chaplaincy. It was like when literally my mentor and pastor at my old church, when I said I felt called to chaplaincy and I think I was going to go in that direction, he literally answered, "Why?" And it was like with this attitude of like, what a waste of your talent. What a waste. Like that's such, and that was the prevailing response I was given, because I was in an environment where, do people know the Seven Mountains kind of theory? Yeah. Okay, if you don't know, that's great. I'm happy for you. But it's basically the idea that Christians are basically like called to be influential in the world and called to be powerful and called to be, I know that. Yes, that face you're making, Melba, I agree. And being among and serving and embracing the queer, the poor, the sick, the unglamorous in any kind of socially acceptable way was just kind of a little sneered at. And so going another way for me was, well, one, being gay, but also like being a chaplain and being content that it's like, God loves the people who are being lost and falling through the cracks of the system, or who are sick and are just fighting to survive, or who are queer, or who are neurodiverse, or things like that. And I don't need to try to make something of my life beyond loving the people in those spaces. And that's you know that's God's work to me. Yeah. Oh, and also, like, sorry, I know I'm very verbose. That's okay. I hope. But also, like, I a couple of times have been the very first minister or clergy person or person, to ever tell. I've had a couple of two I can think of. I was the first person ever to tell two different patients who were lesbian, both of them, that God knew they were lesbian and loved that about them, and it wasn't a mistake. And God wanted them to thrive in being fully who they were. I would never have gotten to have those conversations if I weren't a chaplain. And I'm so glad that it was able to come from the authority of like a queer minister.
I am quite fiercely independent in the fact that I crave bodily autonomy. Just happens to be a part of autism and PDA. I don't know if you've heard that. It's called pathological demand avoidance. And yes, that's a real diagnosis. And for me, in in 8th grade, I came out as trans. 9th grade, it was a downhill slope for me, and I really, really struggled with mental health. Um, it was just not a great time. And sorry. Um, and for me, I so wanted everything to be okay because it was like I just came out as trans and that is what I wanted. And so I should just, all my body dysmorphia and everything that I was struggling with in mental health should just go away because I'm out and about now, and it's just not reality. And it took a lot of therapy and a lot of like talking to people to realize that it's okay to ask for support and it's okay to ask for help and you don't need to always do everything on your own. And there are people in your community who are willing to hold you as you go through things and you don't have to just go through everything on your own. And I feel like, yeah, sorry, what was the question? Oh, yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, so just realizing that I can hold value for myself and I can feel strength in myself and be independent and still have other people hold me as I go through life and I don't need to do everything on my own and that I I if I don't pray to God, he's not just going to like forget about me and be like, "Oh, you don't need help, so you're good on your own if you don't pray to me," He like they'll always be there no matter what. Even if you don't pray, even if you don't read the Bible, even if you don't go to church, they're always going to be there. Even if you think you're a sinner, even if you think that you've done something horrible, they're always going to be there for you. And just realizing that support is always there if you need it. And just like how important it is to be able to ask for support when you need it, because otherwise, like from experience, it can just go downhill. And you just like I've really had to learn how to be an advocate for myself, especially going into high school, being neurodivergent with a lot of teachers who just, I mean, it's definitely more common in this day and age, but like still not 100% like, why are you scribbling in your notebook during class? Like, what are you doing? Just like being able to advocate for myself and advocate a space for my neurodivergence and my queerness in spaces that it's not often normalized.
Man, oh, sorry. I feel like all of queerness is another road. I feel like my entire existence has been quite subversive to what was expected of me, what was asked of me. Um, yeah, I think it was communicated to me from a very young age in a very direct manner that I would marry a man and produce children, and that that would be my life, and that the American dream, this very, very Western white nationalistic dream of you're going to have comfort, you're going to have a job, you're going to have security, you're going to do these things for society, and then you're going to die, and that's it. And that's what you've got. I was like, oh, that's what I've got. That's what I'm doing. Okay. And then it didn't work out that way. And so it feels like coming home to myself. Um, it's been a really long road of resistance, of grief, of more grief than I thought I don't know how many times over the years I've said, I didn't know I could carry this much grief. I did not know. I did not know that there is so much grief and sadness in me. And then through that grief, years ago in a cafe back in college when I was in a missionary era version of self, yikes, but there I was. We were praying for our campus, and the person praying next to me got a picture of, she saw a knife coming at my hand, and she was like, I prayed against it. And when it went away, I saw a forest growing out of your skin. And I felt like God said that that forest is your grief. And I remember kind of sitting on that, thinking about it, and being like, oh, that really changes my relationship with grief. And I think as queer people, we have a lot of unique grief that we bring to our experience in the church, should we choose to stay in the church, and just in general. And man, I remember just thinking, oh, grief is like the nitrogen being returned to the soil. And even though some things are fleeting, other things will stay. And the things that are meant to stay will grow and they'll give life. And I thought of ecosystems and ferns and all these things that forests provide and the home that they provide for life to thrive. And so in that, yeah, um, this is not how I thought my life would look. This is not what 5-year-old HK thought. But man, I'm alive. And every ounce of grief has been more than worth it.
We have one more question that hopefully is a little lighter. But we are so blessed by your vulnerability and by your honesty and the way that you are broadening our view of God as we broaden our understanding of gender and sexuality. That broadens our awareness of God and the wideness of God's love. In conversation with Pastor Katerina, as you were preparing for this, one of you mentioned that imagining Jesus as queer has been really helpful to your faith. Can you share more? What does queerness mean to you? And how does Jesus embody that? Sorry.
No, that was great. I loved that. It's fine. I got it. I love that queer means weird. I know that there are people, especially generation or two older than me, who don't love the term queer the way that we're using it, and I can appreciate that. I respect that that there's a history to this term that is painful, but I don't know. For me, I love reclaiming the idea that it's like, yeah, I am weird. I love that. Love that I don't, fit into the little, box or whatever. And for me, imagining Jesus as queer is like, well, Jesus was queer by the like old school definition of the term. Yeah, he was a weird guy. He did not fit any of the expectations that were placed upon him, and he just turned everything on its head. And for me, queerness, like when you're a queer Christian, like it's like permission granted to question everything and to look at everything through a different lens and to and I think that embracing queerness requires trust, and especially when you're embracing queerness in the context of like God and community, um, because when you don't fit what's prescribed by society for you, then like there's a reason that people have these norms in society. They create a comfortable sense of like, oh, I know how to categorize people. I know how everything works. Everything fits. It's so tidy. Look at our little system that works. And it's like, in a way, that'd be nice if things weren't messy and if things weren't complicated. Like it eases a mental burden and a social burden and a theological burden when things are just make sense and go the way that they're expected to go. And so I get why it's uncomfortable for everyone when people don't fit that, and push back against that. And so it requires trust that it's like, okay, what happens if we do disrupt the whole system the way Jesus did? Jesus going in there and kicking over tables and stuff like that, in the temple, and he's a holy man. Like, what? Um, and the trust that it requires is that like God can hold us together when everything else that we rely on to hold things together starts to come under question or starts to fracture and fall apart or needs to be turned upside down. God and each other and ourselves can be trusted to hold us together in love through all the questioning and uncertainty.
I feel like for me, in my head, I've learned that Jesus looks just like, even before I came out as trans, Jesus just looks so different than what other people perceived him as. And I've realized that everyone kind of has their own little versions of Jesus in their head. Um, no matter what, if it's like a queer Jesus, or if it's like a super white heterosexual man that was like super demanding and like, I don't, stern, yeah. I don't know the word. Um, and so I think it's been really interesting finding the similarities that everybody has in Jesus. And being able to realize that people shape Jesus how they want, how, what the ideal they want to see is, what they think the ideal is, that's how they see Jesus. And I think it's hard to take Jesus out of what you want him to look like and put him into what the Bible says he was like, and also take into how other people want him to be like, and kind of finding the medium ground, And, so you don't just have like, I mean, he totally was queer. I mean, come on, he didn't get married. He was committed to God. Um, yeah, so sorry to anyone's buttons who that pushes. I apologize. Um, uh, sorry, that was a little out of pocket. Yeah, I don't know. Just I feel like it's really important to be able to have conversations with people who see Jesus in a different light, because it can really be eye-opening into how other people want the world to look like. Um, yeah, yeah. Jesus was queer.
That's on that. That's that. We're done. I heard this once said, and it's one of my favorite. I like cling to it a lot. Someone said at a conference I was at, they said, God is always coming out to us. In the same way that we are coming out to ourselves as queer Christians, God is always coming out to us. They are always revealing. I mean, Richard Rohr said, right, the infinite just means infinitely understand, or mystery just means infinitely understandable. That the mystery of God is that they are infinitely understandable, that there's just more to understand. And so when I think about my relationship with God, my relationship with queerness, the word self-determination really just kind of comes to my mind of like, you have allowed me to determine for myself who I am, even as someone who has all the supposed authority in my life to demand who I am, or to tell me, or to define it for me. Instead, you've subverted that and you've told me, but who are you? I made you to determine for yourself. And in the same way, I think Jesus is queer because they determined for themselves who they are. They didn't let people define the rules of society, the way that things should work. But their choice to share power and to be transparent, as opposed to hoarding power and obfuscating truth, was in resistance, and it gave people around them, once again, they, them pronouns, forgotten all aspects, gave people the ability to determine for themselves their worth, their belonging, their autonomy, their economy of choices. And so I really think, yeah, I think about for Jesus how weird it had to have been to enter a world with so many made up rules that people get so defensive about, rather than defending the people who are experiencing the effects of these rules. I just can't imagine coming from a place supposedly like heaven. I don't know how I feel about heaven these days, but if that's where you came from, great. To come from a place of utter freedom and total self-determination into some weird little system with like to come from something so infinite to something so finite and so rigid, and to be like, what is this? Like that's got to be that's the queer experience of the church. I don't know. It strikes home to me. Yeah.
I would love to just sit here and continue to listen to you. I would, but But this is not the end of the conversation, because you're all a part of our community and you give us so much in the gifts that you bring in, particularly today in your gifts of vulnerability and honesty, that you are showing us your true selves. And that is such a blessing to us as a church. I want to just thank you for sharing your stories, sharing your life, sharing your love with us, and in that way showing us more of Jesus. Thank you.